Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today, we're kicking off our 6th annual Oscar series, where subject matter experts discuss the nominees in their category of expertise. Our focus today is achievement in property mastering. Now, props aren't actually recognized by the Academy, but in response to this grave injustice, we've assembled a hypothetical slate of 2024 films that could have been nominated for the work of the property master. If the full series is a multi-course meal, think of this episode as an amuse-bouche. Let me introduce my guests. Gregg Bilson Jr., you're the CEO of the ISS Group, a conglomerate of companies that make, sell, and rent props around the world. Gregg, welcome back to Below the Line.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Also returning is Scott Buckwald, property master and friend of the show. Scott, your credits include The Old Man, The Prestige, and A Mighty Wind. Glad to have you back as well.
Always a pleasure, Skid.
Before we start, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the horrible tragedy of the LA wildfires. After an extremely difficult 2024, this is another devastating blow to the LA film industry and all of the individuals and small businesses that depend on it for their livelihood. To all of our industry colleagues, we see you. Let's kick things off. The 2024 Property Mastering nominees, as selected by us, are Alien Romulus, Blitz, A Complete Unknown, Gladiator II, and Horizon, an American Saga. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this awarding. Apologies in advance if I mispronounce the names of any property masters, and since my guests are welcome to correct me, they are equally culpable if I get a name wrong. First up, Alien Romulus, property master Graham Purdy. Did I get his name right? That's the first one that I have a question about.
Yes, you did. And he's English, so we have to make sure we do this correctly.
Talk to me about Alien Romulus. What put that onto our list for 2024 nominees?
To me, it is the epitome of what propping is. It is for a movie that might have had a lot of CGI, and in the future, as movies start to use AI, the things that are in the actor's hand still have to be made by an individual. And where production design and more are starting to go with CGI, the prop master is forefront in a movie like this. And because the movie takes place in the future, everything had to be created and sourced. This was not a go to the mall and see what you can buy.
Yeah, and for me, it was just really bringing me back to the first Alien movie I saw. It was gritty. It was dirty. Space travel wasn't fun or sexy. It was pretty dangerous. And the first Alien movie I saw, much like this one, I literally screamed a few times while I was watching it. They really did a great job to scare the crap out of everybody, myself included, and the whole time looking wonderful.
Now, I think this movie has a particular challenge that I also think they do very well, where it's set after Alien, our first movie in the series, but before Aliens. They're right in the middle of those films, and they managed to recognize in both directions. And I think that's also an issue for the props. I wonder if you could talk more about that, if you think that's true.
It's very true. It's also important to know that a lot of the movies that could get nominated for achievement in property, we have to remember, it doesn't mean that these are necessarily movies that would have won an Oscar or been nominated for an Oscar as Best Picture, Best Directing, Best Acting. This is solely based on the props.
And also those props that are being made, acquired, modified, have to fit in with the set design, the entire vibe of the picture, which I thought they did a great job of. It harkened back to a little bit of the old school look, some of the bulky, the lights, the blinking stuff. It wasn't a ton of screens and burned in green screen type of stuff. It was all pretty real.
What also I like about this, and you'll notice that a lot of the other movies that we've nominated are period films. And a big difference for a prop master, when you're doing a period film, you still always work with the production designer, but you still know with weapons, with a lot of things, you're basing it on what actually exists. So even if you need to remanufacture something or just created out of nothing. You're still working with a design that's already been predetermined. With something like Alien Romulus, you really have to work with the production designer because, like Gregg said, there's a definite look that it has to agree with. So you can't just go and make a backpack, a gun, any particular handheld object. It looks like it needs to be organic to the world around it.
And anytime I see something that doesn't seemingly fit in, it kind of takes me out of the movie going experience. The only time I experienced that with Alien was the windshield wipers on the spaceship. I thought that was
Yeah.
still pretty funny. Literally a windshield wiper as they're trying to dock to the station.
It's a very hard thing to do. I have not done a lot of futuristic movies. I've done period work, but you really have to divorce yourself from everything that exists now. So for something like a windshield wiper, and I think we're more sophisticated in movies today, especially in terms of sci-fi and fantasy, you almost have to take a windshield wiper from 2024 and then increase it by year, thinking where would it have gone in the year, 2100, and then so on and so forth, to allow it to evolve to where you need it to be in the particular movie.
With futuristic props in particular, we know with technology, most of the technology that we're having at our fingertips right now, we don't see. But when it's a film that's set in a particular time frame, you have to figure out a way to show it, knowing that the reality is it's some computer chip in a little black box that you would never see, but they have to somehow make it more visual so you realize that what it's doing and that it's in the future without it looking like, a crazy hokey looking prop.
Well, and I think that goes back to my earlier challenge as well, is that here you have a certain look of props from the first film and a certain look of props from Aliens, the sequel, and you have to kind of fit into the middle. You can't jump ahead of the later film, but you also want to make sure that you kind of are projecting that you're headed in that direction from a props perspective. And I think they did that really well.
Right. And, for a movie that is based on tech and it's based in the world that we live in, it wouldn't make sense for them to be using anything really from the first movie because I think it's been what, 25 years since the first movie in the timeline of the film. So there has to be sometimes very minor adjustments. I mean, look at what current soldiers are carrying today and then compare it to the equipment in Vietnam. I mean, just simple things like the helmets have changed. And even if they're carrying weapons that might not have changed that much, just the aesthetics have changed a lot. So something as simple as a helmet redesign has set a whole new era and it tells the audience that you're in a different time and place.
Any particular props from this film that you want to give shout outs for?
You know what? I really viewed it all as a whole. I didn't land on one thing. It wasn't a movie that looked like it was trying to launch a toy line. So no, there was nothing in particular. I'm sure if I was giving an audio track as I was watching it, something would pop up as a prop master that I could just imagine what that person had to go through to put it together. But as a whole, the movie worked, and I found it really successful that the props did exactly what they needed to do, and it really moved the story and the plot forward.
Yeah, unfortunately for our craft, when it's done exceptionally well,
It's invisible.
it's invisible. It just all fits and nothing stood out that it didn't belong. So to me, they've achieved that goal in the futuristic genre, I think is one of the most difficult to achieve. One other thing to mention on this film that Graham was the property master on is that it was also largely done in Budapest, which is one of the new hot places to film for a multitude of reasons. But it's even more challenging to film something abroad in an area that doesn't have 75 to 100 years of infrastructure built up. So that property master is even more challenged to acquiring things on a daily basis, setting up shops, manufacturing materials when you're in a different area is even more complex. So the fact that he was able to do what he did there was even more impressive.
That's the kind of insight to expect from you, Gregg. Thank you so much for bringing them. All right, we'll move on to the next film on our list, Blitz, property master Gail Chamberlain.
For me, this was a movie where I just got lost in that world right from the beginning. I came out of it honestly thinking it was the best movie I'd seen up to that point, and it is one of my favorite movies of the year. Critically, it was a little mixed. It got more of an indie release than a major release. I'm a real sucker for period films, and especially period films where the period is something that I'm really I fantasize about. And the grit and the human element of this movie really captured me. And all of the props that went along with it, just things of, people just going through debris. It brings about the human condition. And especially now after the fires, you look at the Blitz and you could have a little more empathy that the suffering that these people did and the props, again, had to be period correct. And that is a lot of work.
Yeah, I enjoy period films as well. But what was interesting about this film is it covered one, a story I wasn't completely familiar with. Obviously, we knew that London was bombed extensively. But what I didn't realize is that many of the children were removed from that region, and that entire mechanism, the way they covered that, was something I wasn't aware of. And then I thought they dug deeper into what the women left behind were
Mhm.
doing, many of the jobs that men were doing, because now the men are on the front line battling. So they were in bomb making factories and old lathes and mills and building these ordinances right in front of our eyes. I thought they just did a great job of making all of that super authentic. The rescue, the fire departments, I mean, the food scenes, the medical scenes, the underground where they were being kept out of going into the tunnels for the bomb shelter. I mean, all of that was just so fascinating and how those people existed and lived. And honestly, the takeaway I got was if 2025 Los Angeles had to deal with that, we wouldn't cope very well with it. I don't think this generation can do what those people did back in World War II. I mean, the hardships were real, and when you're able to capture that on film and you really understand it, I saw it in close proximity to the fires that we have here in Los Angeles, and they were dealing with that for months on end.
And a much greater scale too. When we talk about having uh, recognition for property mastering, movies like this really bring it home to me because a movie like this could get nominated for costume design or for production design. And a lot, especially with production design, a good piece of that is what they got from the property mastering, from the work that went into it. And it's on so many levels. When you look at a movie like this, when Greg was referring to the women working in the bomb factories and the lathes and the equipment they were working on, it's not just the props that our lead actors have, but some of these scenes had a lot of background in it. And all of these people had glasses, they were carrying different items, the pieces they were working on the lathes. I mean, even the background has to have as much work put into it as the foreground. And that would be a statement I would make on any of the period films that we're going to talk about coming up. It's an incredible amount of detailed work. And when you look into the background and you see that the background was given the same care and concern as the foreground, that's quite an achievement. When a movie is made, this movie, like I said earlier, it played mostly independent and art houses. So it did not have the distribution and probably the budget of some bigger movies. But when you look at it, again, just in terms of property, it had everything that a big budget movie would possibly have. The property mastering did not skimp anywhere along the line. And sometimes that's even more of an achievement when you consider the tools that you're given to complete your job might be far less and so much more you have to compensate for.
Share your insights on our third nominee, a complete unknown, property master Michael Jortner.
Well, I know Michael. He's one the real nice man, a great gentleman, and his scope of work that he's done is amazing. I was about a bit of a fan geek on this one. As soon as I saw the film, even though it was later at night, I text him. He's a New York person, and I just applauded him with the job he did. There wasn't a single scene in this movie that I wasn't completely in the time period. Started in 1963, 1964. The microphones, the wardrobe, the cars. In New York, they handle all the cars and the picture vehicles. The motorcycle he drove around, the studios, every aspect of this film was just spot on. And I'm a big fan of Dylan anyways. I thought they told the story pretty well. He wasn't a real warm and fuzzy, nice guy, and they even covered that pretty well. I thoroughly enjoyed this film, and I'm actually going to see it again. That's how much I liked it.
What impresses me about this movie, a lot of people would probably think a Western was more difficult to do because it takes place 100, 150 years ago, and so little is available, which to a degree is true. But the layers and how many different layers of props that you need in a Western is far different from something that took place really just a generation ago, because Dylan existed in far more of a retail economy. So there were motorcycles, there were microphones, people in the background all had things, where in a Western, there just wasn't as much product available. So you didn't have to go as many layers deep. And I've done a Western, and I worked on Mad Men, which was the same period. So there's so many little things to go for that are beyond what the collectible stages are. The one thing that impressed me in this movie, so often in movies of the recent past, they play on stereotypes, where if a movie takes place in 1966, all of the cars are 1966. Everything looks like the world just began in 1966. But if you watch this movie, they went back 10, 15 years, so that some of the cars, people were driving cars still from the 40s and in the 50s. Things that people had, whether it was their handbags or backpacks, pizza boxes, just little details. Everything is not new, which is the same as today. It's 2024, but a lot of our world, just looking around you, dates from the last 15 to 20 years. And they got that warmth in it that I really loved.
And they just really made New York at that time period look fantastic. And it was the background, it was the foreground, it was everything going on in the entire scene. It wasn't just about Timothy being Bob Dylan. It was the entire
Yeah.
vibe, and they just nailed it. And that was a really interesting time politically. The kids were doing their own thing, drugs were becoming a thing, and I just thought they covered it all well. Nothing stood out. It was super, super well done.
It was not done the way a TV movie of the same subject would have been handled in the 1970s, where they would have played to stereotypes. I will always appreciate the work that a prop master does on the background, because the foreground props are scripted. Everyone's talking to him about it. There was no doubt that Dylan was going to have the correct guitar. That was probably the easiest thing that the prop master had to do. It's the background things. It's doing all of the things that nobody gives you any notes for, that all of the research, all of the hard work is really in setting the background.
And if you've seen the movie, you look at their apartment, you look at the guys when they've been partying all night. There were so many layers and
Yeah.
details that just made it so authentic. It was really fun to watch.
And having been on sets where this was done, I would fantasize about it, and I can get lost in a set. You look around, and if you keep your eyes focused on the right thing, and you don't look up to see the movie lamps, and you don't look off set, you could really experience what you would have experienced if you were in 1965. It is as close to being able to step into a time machine as I've ever had. When I worked on the Prestige, we were on the Universal backlot, so I could walk and turn corners and go street after street and feel like I was in 1890s London. And it really, I was saying to myself, if I went back to 1890s London right now, this is what my body would be experiencing. And it's wild. And the movie was very well done with that. I'm sure at the time you really felt like you were in 1960s Greenwich Village.
It's a great trip without having to do LSD or acid or anything. Right.
You could talk to Michael Jordan about that. Then I don't know. Maybe how they managed to get into the mood for that. Something you said earlier, Scott. It's interesting to think about how much difficulty there is in getting the background props right. But talk to me about any peculiar challenges of dealing with hero props. For example, the guitar held by Dylan. When That is so well documented, and there's so many fans.
I can't really speak for that. I do know that with things like the guitars that people played, it's so well documented, and there's such a fandom for that, and the information is there. Whatever show he did, there are plenty of pictures and documents, and identifying a guitar is very easy. And those guitars are still available. We're not talking about trying to match an instrument that's 400 years old. So again, it's very well documented. But I look at the background, keeping the musical theme intact. It's like an orchestra or a symphony. You might not know anything about music theory. You might not know a G from an F sharp. But if you're going to a concert and it's out of tune, it will give you a headache and you won't like it. You won't know why, but you just will not enjoy it. You will know something is off. And if you're watching a period film like this, and you see people wearing headphones that might be from the early 70s when the scene is 1965, simply because it was sloppy and the prop master said, oh, no one's going to notice. You do enough of that, you might not have a headache, but it takes away from it. It's not finely tuned. And this movie was really finely tuned.
Next on our list is Gladiator II, property master Gary Dawson.
A total tie-in with what you just said, where they did take artistic liberty in something, and it's not doesn't reflect poorly on the props, but it just ties in with what you were saying. Greg and I were talking about this when we were looking at the movies to choose. The shark tank in the middle of the Roman Colosseum probably makes great movie entertainment. Never happened.
But it did actually force me to look at historical reports that they did have maritime battles in the Colosseum,
Yeah.
but it just kind of became Sharknado with the sharks, the way they did it. The film looked fantastic, and when you're following up what is, in my opinion, the original Gladiator, one of the top 10 best films like ever made, that's very difficult to match up to. I thought they did a really good job telling the story post Gladiator, with another regime, and they covered a lot very well. The only part that took me out of it was the Sharknado aspect of the maritime scene, but everything else I thought was done incredibly well. And once again, every single scene, there's nothing you give somebody that you get in the contemporary world. Everything is created or made, and it's all has to be historically accurate.
And this really did have so many layers because, again, unlike a Western, this movie is taking place in a major metropolitan city. There were huge crowds, so many things from helmets to possessions. It's really no different than having to do a contemporary movie with everything that people would be carrying, dinner plates, just so much stuff. And like Greg said, none of it, not a single piece of it could be found. You can't borrow things like this from a museum. You're looking at items that are in the neighborhood of what, 1500 to 2000 years old, and they need to look new for the time. So everything has to be manufactured. And it's an amazing undertaking. It's an undertaking that, when done right, like Greg said earlier, when done correct, no one knows it. And everybody coming out of that theater probably didn't give a second thought to what the prop master had to go through to make all of those helmets, all of those swords, all of those knives, the plates, the cups, just the most simple things took such a gargantuan effort. And no one in the audience would have thought twice to shake someone's hand about a job well done.
And for somebody never having been on a tailgate at 5 o'clock in the morning when you're starting to prop out background, which sometimes can be in the numbers of thousands, they don't realize that you're giving a specific group of things to this person. That person's going to be with these things potentially for 12 or 14
Mhm.
hours that day. We're going to break for lunch. We're going to take breaks. You have to make sure that those people continue having the same things. You don't lose it. It doesn't get destroyed. They don't have something that's more dangerous that can hurt somebody. There's so many different elements. And this goes on for 50, 60, 70, 80 days, depending on how large the project is. It is a mammoth undertaking.
I almost could applaud myself that I can go to a movie like this and enjoy it and not be taken out of it by being a prop master. And I would see a movie like this and I try my best. And I'm pretty successful at not looking at every single thing he did and constantly nudging the person next to me going, do you realize he had to make that sword? Do you realize he had to do this? And it's very hard because there are times where I could just empathize with what that person is going through. And what Greg was saying,
I can empathize with what the person sitting next to you in the theater is going through if you're bringing up every single
right.
prop.
But it's just, it's like until Greg said it, I didn't even consider the fact of how much maintenance there is during the day. You spend months getting everything. Then you bring it down to the set, and you need a whole crew of people just to watch that the background is not leaving your custom-made $1,000 sword leaning against a tree someplace. And then when you walk on set, go, "Where's your sword?" And they go, I don't know. I left it someplace. And then before the camera starts rolling, you have to go find it.
And then oftentimes, well before camera is even rolling, weeks, sometimes months in advance, you're getting these items, you're rehearsing with people so they know how to properly go into battle. And it doesn't look like some cartoon Tom and Jerry and a bunch of people not on the same page. The one thing the Romans were known for was they were brutal, but they were very well trained and they approached battle the same way. So you had to teach all of these people who 2 weeks before may have been an accountant doing something and they had never done this before. So it's a mammoth undertaking. It's not just the things, but then also getting all of those people to operate these things the correct way.
The thing that you don't see is when one of the background or one of our gladiators is holding a knife, what you're not seeing is that one knife is not just one knife. There are probably 3 to 4 doubles of that knife. Then there are doubles that are made in various degrees of softness. You might have a hard rubber, a soft rubber. There's probably knives that are cut almost to the hilt, so that one single prop could generate tens of thousands of dollars of other support props, all for that one particular knife. And you don't see them all laid out on a table. So again, the audience sees the one knife, not realizing how much work the prop master had to do for all the other knives that are used as stand-ins and are used as stunt knives and so on and so forth.
Yeah, when I see a film that really blows me away like this, just due to the scope and the scale and the size of everything, I oftentimes will just reach out to the prop master and it's like, how on earth did you do this? How large was your crew? How many prop trailers did you have full of stuff? What was your greatest challenge? What went wrong? What went exceptionally well? I just love hearing what they dealt with because there are times where we reach out to our contemporaries and say, hey, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I know that you did it with this person 3 shows ago. What would you suggest? So we try to get tips and help and assistance from people that have done similar things just so we can learn to do it a better way and a more efficient way.
I have never done a job from the smallest home-based drama to a big military or whatever kind of show without coming to a place like ISS and getting support and help from various professionals, whether it's manufacturing or rentals or purchasing, or even just being put in touch with their database of other prop masters who have done similar shows that I could get a kind of a leg up on. And I think that goes for, there's no prop master that could just go into a show and just do it all by themselves. We all need the help of other professionals of different degrees.
One last thing, just to talk about it. It's not always just the props, but you'll read a script as large as this, and you instantly figure, oh, this is going to be a $10 million script, budget. And then the UPM or the line producer tells you, well, you have 800,000. So not only is it difficult to come up with all this, but then you have to be very, very selective on where to spend the money to get the biggest bang for the buck. So you don't just spend all the money in the very first scene and don't have the rest for the rest of the movie. And that happens more times than you know. I have never been told in my 40 plus years of either being a property master or being at ISS where a producer came in and told me, we have an obscene amount of money. Please help me.
One of the things that I both want to kick people in the pants for, as well as applaud them for, myself included, is that every one of those jobs, when I'm not given nearly enough money or labor support, I never just go up to them and say, it can't be done, which is what I should do. If I was having a contractor come to my house and I didn't give them enough money, I wouldn't get the extra room built onto the house or the porch as big as I want. But yet it seems that every job that every prop master is ever given, we always find a way to complete it. Whether we're rubbing the right genie's lamp, I don't know, but it always seems to happen that we're not given everything we need because the people giving it to us don't really understand the scope of what we do, which again leads to why we're not being mentioned as achievement in property mastering because people don't really appreciate everything we do, but yet somehow we always do it.
Well, we appreciate it here on the show. And so, Greg, when you do have those conversations, you should encourage them to come on below the line. We talk to those property masters when they tell you the really amazing stories of getting it done. When you spoke earlier about the sharks, which, as we've established, was not historically accurate, it did remind me of a story I read about the first Gladiator. And I wanted to get a property master's perspective on it. And that was that they made the decision to use stirrups when they were on the horses, when in fact that was an anachronism. The Romans didn't have stirrups, but just for safety and for stunts, they felt that it was a necessary thing to do. As a property master, do you accept something like that grudgingly? Or I don't know, does it feel like you're sort of being taken out of your role of creating that space when you have to do something that has a good reason, but doesn't actually fit with the period that you're trying so hard to replicate?
Over the years, I've been asked to do things, and I'll always bring it up as I would not be doing my job unless I mentioned it. I mean, at the end of the day, they're my client, and if they want stirrups on horses or whatever the anachronism might be, I would dissuade them from doing it. But if they have a sound reason and that's what they want to do, like I said, they're the client. I would never quit a movie if it's not assuming it's not a safety issue. I mean, it's ultimately their call.
Yeah, they're the filmmaker. We are there to service their vision of what that project happens to be. Most of the time, it is not a documentary. It's not historically 100% authentic. And they will make these cheats when and how they want to. Like Scott says, we do bring it to their attention. This wasn't used for another 300 years for these reasons, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's their film. Only thing we can do is give them the correct information and they'll do what they want with it, really, at the end of the day.
A case in point, when I was doing Mad Men, all of the typewriters were all IBM Selectric typewriters, which were brought ahead. I think we were using them 2 years before they came out. And that was brought up. And part of their reasoning were that manual typewriters would be too clunky and making too much noise. So they wanted to go with the IBM Selectric and have that little anachronism. There was another story point where one of the secretaries was stuck working all night because she had to make carbon copies where she would have to type it. Every time she typed it, she would get 3 copies. So she was doing it over and over and over again to generate all these copies. And she makes a very kind of forecasting comment going, well, if there was some magic machine, I could just put this in and it could copy it, then I could be out of here instantly. Well, the thing was that Xerox had been around for 3 years and an office as big as the one on Mad Men would have had a copy machine. But they wanted that joke. They wanted to be able to say that. So they just ignored it.
Well, the next movie on our list is certainly entitled To Use Stirrups Where Appropriate. That's Horizon, an American Saga, property master Keith Walters.
Well, I personally love the Western genre because it is something that's very typically American. I'm also a big fan of Kevin Costner. And it was, once again, not the glitzy, shiny, Lone Ranger kind of Western. It was gritty. These people had a hard, tough life. Indians didn't want them there. There was constant conflict. Just getting through a day there, I thought, was portrayed extremely well.
I loved it. I'm a sucker for long, big movies like this. Sitting in that theater for 3.5 hours, I sat in the seat and I just got lost in the movie. And it was really a movie again where background props were the king. Everybody had something to help solidify the era. It just looked beautiful. One prop worked with one piece of costume, with one piece of production design, with one piece of set decorating to just put the whole movie together and just paint a wonderful picture. I thought it was terrific.
And it was filthy. I mean, that time period, you must never have felt clean when you were back in the Western days. In the battles that took place, the brutality of those battles, I thought was incredibly authentic. Women, children, everything was burned. It was brutal, but that was the way it really was.
And there was probably, I was talking to some of the people involved in the movie. They were shooting in the middle of nowhere. So it was always a long trip back to the prop truck if you needed something. Nothing was ever just laid out on a table in front of you. For a movie that was so dirty and so gritty, the amount of maintenance on the weapons to keep them clean, to keep the props functioning, had to just also just, again, it's a major job that you never think of when you're watching the movie.
And you're doing this under some brutal conditions. In the summer, it is hot as hell. In the wintertime, it's freezing cold. You're working with animals, children, weapons, things that are supposed to be hundreds of years old and has to look new, has to function. You have to teach and show people how to use these things so they look authentic, and it doesn't stand out. Everything from the Western towns, just a simple background scene, somebody walking down. There's so many different elements, and you have to be historically accurate on what that would look like.
I think that the dirt and the isolation is really what has to come through, that it can't be like a 1950s television Western where everybody looks well fed, everybody is clean, everybody looks heroic. If you watch this movie with that understanding, you could see the blankets are threadbare, the clothes are threadbare, that their holsters look like they've had them for a long time, that the sun and the sand have done a number on everything. The people just look worn. I mean, it was a really difficult life. It can't just pre-age the human being. Everything in contact in that world has to have gone through those conditions. But again, it all is done to support the mood that Kevin Costner was trying to get out of the movie. It's not just about the actor's performance. The actors could have given the best performance in the world, but if everything that supports them, from the props to the costuming to the animals, if they didn't carry their weight, the movie would have failed. There's certainly a lot of applause given. I know Joey Dillon was doing a lot of the weapons, and I've worked with Joey before, and he's fantastic. We did a Western together. And now in today's world, the safety that has to be watched, the maintenance on the guns are a whole microcosm within the prop world. It's a department in and of itself that has to be given equal attention. And you never heard a single news story about anything going wrong with the weapons on that movie, and nor do you hear it going on any movie. It's something that we are so incredibly safe with. And when a movie like this comes out, that's 3.5 hours. How long did they film?
Oh, forever. They're still filming, I think.
Yeah, when something like that happens, the fact that there were no news stories relating to the weapons, it shouldn't surprise you. What happened on Rust is the exception, not the rule. And the rule, when you have somebody like Joey Dillon on set, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, he's an unbelievable professional, unbelievably safe, very gifted on his weapon handling skills and being able to teach actors and actresses who have never held a gun before to look completely authentic and comfortable in that role and do all of that in a very safe fashion. You've got fire taking place, you've got gunfire taking place, you've got animals involved with people riding those animals. So if the gunfire is too loud and scares a horse, it can change the entire dynamic of the scene and seriously hurt people. You have cameras set up for a particular place, they have to thread the needle through fires and everything else, and gunshots are going on. This horse could get spooked. So there's so much involved that people don't see. When it goes off without a hitch and safely, and they get what they want, it's amazing.
It also just goes to show that property is not just property on any given show. And maybe with the exception of Alien Romulus, at any time in this movie, you could have weapons happening, you could have food happening. You could have period props playing. You could have hero props playing. You could have cars playing. And each one of those on a movie of the scope of some of the movies we've talked about could be an entire department within the department. My guess is, correct me if I'm wrong, Joey probably did nothing but weapons the entire movie. Joey was not setting up director's chairs, was not propping the lead actor. He was there just for weapons.
Joey will also jump into other areas when he's not busy specifically
Of
with
course.
weapons, but his number one priority is the safety and the safe use of weapons on a film set. But if there's nothing going on that particular day with live gunfire, then Joey will jump in and do what's needed, because when you see the scope and scale of a project like this, you can't have too many people helping out.
I think with all five of these films, we've helped illustrate how important a role that props plays for completing the vision of these filmmakers. One of these years, we're still hopeful that we'll be working with an actual list of nominees from the Academy. But until then, we're going to keep putting the focus on it because we think it's important.
Well, to that point, we actually had our very first awards program for the Property Masters Guild. So we were able to hand out awards for exceptional jobs done on a multitude of different aspects of our craft. And it was received incredibly well. We're looking forward to season 2 of the award show next year. And I think Scott was at the first one. I unfortunately was out of the country.
It was unbelievable. I was so incredibly impressed with the job that was done. There was nothing low rent about it. It felt like what it was. It was a major Hollywood award show, and it represented our craft to the highest degree. I wasn't nominated for anything, and I was so proud to be there. Just sitting in this audience and listening to the presenters and watching these people get awards just meant so much to me. And I think it's really lucky for the younger people getting into this business that they'll be able to grow up and mature in a business where their craft is being recognized.
Yeah, as regular listeners may recall, it was July of last year before the awards show, season 20, episode 2 of this podcast. Mike Trudell and Chris Call came on the show to talk about the Property Masters Guild and the MacGuffin Awards, which again were being held the month after. I am so pleased to hear it went well, and that we're going to see more of that going forward.
And then the other thing we have coming out any day now is the first issue of Prop Culture, which the Property Masters Guild is publishing, and myself and Teresa Corvino are the editors of the magazine. There'll be a digital copy, but it will be an actual handheld copy, which in our editor's letter, we said, how could a magazine about property masters not have a version to actually put into your hand?
Very appropriate. Maybe we'll start seeing it in background people's hands on lots and lots of sets going forward.
Well, the cool thing about our film and television industry is the rapid evolution of what we do and how we do it. I see this Property Masters Guild, the award shows, and doing shows in the future as just part of that evolution. This seems so right and organic. We should have been doing this years ago.
The good thing is it seems like it's something whose time has come. It doesn't feel forced. Part of the goal of the magazine, we're not looking to make it an industry magazine, even though it's being published by the same people who do magazines for cinematographers and locations and set decorators and the Art Directors Guild. We're saying that prop culture is pop culture. And the magazine is meant as much for property masters to enjoy as it would be for a producer to get it in their hand and really read it and go, I had no idea that property masters did this. It's going to have interviews with people showing what we do. It really is a way to look under the hood of what goes on in our department in a fun pop culture way.
And this could bring to us the next several generations of property masters that want to get into this industry for all of these reasons that we're talking about.
That's a good point.
It's kind of a recruitment for somebody who says, hey, I want to be a property master, because they get to do all these cool things on all these different periods over a career. And it's cliche, but it's very true. I think you can tell by the passion that Scott and myself have about this industry. If you're doing something you love doing, even though it may be difficult, you don't have to work a day in your life. you're really living the dream. You're getting to do something. Somebody's paying you to do it. That's a great gig to do for 20 or 30 years, right?
And I've been doing this now for 35 years or so. And when people start saying, so you ever want to retire? You ever want to retire? I love doing this. Every job I have, and there are days where it is so backbreaking, exhausting. You go to work not feeling well sometimes, whatever the case may be, but it is just so much fun. And I really am having so much fun doing this that as long as I could stand upright and do a prop breakdown, I want to keep doing this. This is what I would be doing as a hobby. It allows me to tinker. It allows me to research. It's just everything that to me is fun.
Well, on that note, we're going to call it a wrap. It was great having you guys both here. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And if you are in town, we want to make sure you're absolutely invited to the second show with regard to the awards, because we'd love to get your take on it, being that you deal with so many different fields and crafts that are currently being, awarded these different things for the Globes, the Emmys, and the Oscars. I'd love to have your take on what this is like to you.
Well, I was sorry to miss the first year, but yes, I'm putting it on my calendar. I'm really hoping to make it during 2025.
Definitely consider doing the podcast live from the MacGuffin Awards.
Watch for that, folks, and something to hope for. Quick note for listeners, both new and old, this is the first of a planned 13 episodes of Oscar coverage, and I hope you'll stick with us. I'll be churning out new episodes right up until the ceremony on March 2nd, so subscribe now if you haven't already, so you catch them all. As always, I appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.